In the blistering heat of the Arizona Territory, where the sun scorched the earth like an unforgiving branding iron, old rancher Elias Thorne knelt in the dust of his failing homestead, his weathered hands trembling as they gripped the barrel of a rusty Colt revolver pressed against his temple. The barrel was cold against his sun-baked skin, a stark contrast to the sweat trickling down his furrowed brow, and in that moment, as the wind whispered through the skeletal remains of his cattle fences, Elias whispered his final plea to the heavens, or perhaps to the devil himself, "Please, just make it quick." But fate, that cruel trickster of the Wild West, had other plans, for as his finger tightened on the trigger, a shadow fell across him, long and ominous, belonging to a stranger whose eyes burned like coals from the pits of hell, a man known only as Black Jack Harlan, the devil of the Badlands, whose stare could freeze a man's soul before his bullet ever found its mark. If this tale of desperation and redemption resonates with you, and if you believe in the power of kindness and second chances even in the harshest of frontiers, then hit that like button, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, share this video with a friend who needs a spark of hope, and subscribe to Moments of Love for more stories that touch the heart and stir the spirit. Elias Thorne had once been a man of unyielding pride, a rancher who carved his legacy from the untamed wilderness with nothing but calloused hands and a stubborn will. Born under the vast skies of the frontier in the waning days of the Civil War, he had watched his father hang from a noose for rustling cattle that weren't his, a lesson in the fragility of justice that hardened Elias's heart like leather left too long in the sun. He married young, to a woman named Clara, whose laughter could chase away the coyotes' howls, and together they built Thorne Ranch into a beacon of prosperity amid the Red Rock canyons. Their children, 2 boys and a girl, grew strong under the relentless sun, learning to rope calves and mend fences before they could recite their prayers. But the West was a merciless mistress, and drought came like a biblical plague, turning lush pastures into cracked wastelands where even the sagebrush wilted in defeat. The cattle thinned, their ribs protruding like the spines of ancient beasts unearthed from the soil, and one by one, they dropped, their lowing cries echoing Elias's growing despair. Creditors from the distant banks of San Francisco circled like vultures, demanding payments he couldn't muster, and in the dead of night, Elias would stare at the ceiling beams of his modest cabin, wondering if the rope his father had dangled from might offer him a similar escape. The struggles deepened as winter approached, not with snow but with a bone-chilling wind that stripped the last vestiges of hope from the land. Clara fell ill, her once vibrant cheeks hollowed by fever, and the local doc, a grizzled veteran of the Indian Wars, shook his head gravely, muttering about consumption that no frontier remedy could cure. Elias rode for days to fetch medicine from the nearest town, Dust Creek, a ramshackle outpost of saloons and gambling dens where law was as scarce as water. There, he pawned his grandfather's pocket watch, the only heirloom of value, but it wasn't enough. The apothecary demanded more, and in his desperation, Elias turned to the poker tables, his steady hands betraying him as the cards fell unkindly. He lost everything that night, including his dignity, slinking back to the ranch with empty pockets and a heart heavy with failure. The children sensed the shift, their playful romps giving way to silent vigils by their mother's bedside, and Elias, once the pillar of strength, found himself crumbling under the weight of it all. He argued with God in the quiet hours, questioning why a man who had toiled honestly should suffer so, and in those moments, the devil's whisper seemed louder than any divine reply, tempting him toward shortcuts that honorable men shunned, rustling from neighboring spreads, or worse, joining the outlaws who roamed the Badlands unchecked. As the seasons bled into one another, the ranch teetered on the brink of ruin, and Elias's isolation grew, a self-imposed exile from the community that once revered him. Whispers in Dust Creek painted him as a broken man, unfit to lead his herd or his family, and pride kept him from seeking aid, even as the bank foreclosed on his land piece by piece. One fateful evening, as thunderheads gathered like omens on the horizon, a band of riders thundered onto his property, led by Black Jack Harlan, a notorious gunslinger whose name evoked shudders from Texas to California. Harlan, with his scarred face and eyes that gleamed with predatory cunning, had heard of Thorne's plight and saw opportunity in the desperation. He demanded tribute, a share of the remaining cattle, or threatened to burn the ranch to ashes, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of countless graves. Elias, alone in the barn with his rifle, felt the devil's stare boring into him, a gaze that stripped away illusions and laid bare the soul's darkest corners. The confrontation built slowly, like a storm brewing, with Harlan's men encircling the homestead, their shadows dancing in the flickering lantern light, while inside, Clara's labored breaths served as a haunting underscore to the tension. Elias shuddered, not from fear of death, but from the realization that his failures had led them here, to this precipice where one wrong move could doom them all. Yet, in the midst of this encroaching darkness, a flicker of change began to emerge, subtle at first, like the first raindrop after a long drought. It started with young Tommy, Elias's eldest son, who had ventured into town against his father's wishes and returned with a stranger, a wandering preacher named Reverend Silas, a man whose own past was marred by loss and redemption. Silas, with his tattered Bible and gentle demeanor, spoke not in fire and brimstone sermons but in quiet stories of second chances, drawing from his days as a reformed outlaw who had once ridden with the likes of Harlan. He tended to Clara with herbs gathered from hidden oases, his presence a balm that eased her pain and ignited a spark in Elias's weary eyes. As the nights wore on, Silas shared tales around the flickering hearth, of men who had stared into the abyss and stepped back, choosing mercy over vengeance, kindness over the gun. Elias resisted at first, his pride a fortress, but the preacher's words chipped away at the walls, revealing the vulnerability beneath, the grief for his father, the fear of losing Clara, the shame of failing his children. Slowly, the rancher began to open up, confessing his burdens in the dim light, and in those confessions, he found not weakness, but a strange strength, a resolve to fight not with bullets, but with the quiet determination that had built his life from nothing. The suspense mounted as Harlan's deadline loomed, his scouts patrolling the ranch's borders like ghosts in the moonlight, their threats escalating with each passing day. Elias faced internal turmoil, torn between the devil's easy path, surrendering to Harlan's demands or meeting him in a blaze of gunfire, and the uncertain road of redemption Silas offered. Vivid dreams plagued him, visions of his family's graves dotting the parched earth, contrasted with fleeting glimpses of renewal, green shoots pushing through the cracks. The turning point came during a fierce sandstorm that howled like a banshee across the Badlands, blinding man and beast alike. In the chaos, one of Harlan's men, a young drifter named Luke, was thrown from his horse and left for dead near the ranch. Elias, spotting the crumpled figure from his porch, hesitated, the devil's stare echoing in his mind, urging him to let the intruder perish. But Clara's faint voice from within the cabin, pleading for mercy, stirred something deep within him, a memory of his own father's unjust end, and the cycle of violence it perpetuated. Against the storm's fury, Elias ventured out, dragging the injured man to shelter, binding his wounds with strips from his own shirt, and offering water from their dwindling supply. Luke, awakening to unexpected kindness, revealed fragments of his story, a boy coerced into Harlan's gang, haunted by regrets, much like Elias once was. As days turned to weeks, this act of compassion rippled outward, transforming the ranch's fate in ways Elias could scarcely imagine. Luke, moved by the mercy shown, defected from Harlan's band, whispering warnings of the impending raid and offering to stand with the Thorns. Word spread through the Badlands, carried on the winds to Dust Creek, where old neighbors, inspired by tales of Elias's defiance through kindness, rallied with supplies and men. The preacher Silas orchestrated quiet alliances, turning potential enemies into unlikely allies, and even Clara, her health mending under the care, found renewed vigor, her presence a rallying cry for the family. The climax built under a blood-red sunset, as Harlan and his riders crested the hill, their silhouettes stark against the dying light. Elias stood firm on his porch, not with gun in hand, but with open palms, meeting the devil's stare head-on. Harlan, expecting resistance or capitulation, found instead a united front, ranchers, townsfolk, and even some of his own disillusioned men, drawn by the magnetic pull of second chances. The confrontation unfolded not in gunfire, but in words, Elias's voice steady as he recounted his journey from despair to hope, challenging Harlan to see the humanity in his own scarred soul. The outlaw, faced with the mirror of his potential redemption, faltered, his stare softening for the first time, and in a moment that hung like eternity, he turned his horse and rode into the twilight, his legend crumbling like the dry earth beneath his hooves. In the aftermath, the ranch bloomed anew, rains finally breaking the drought as if the heavens themselves approved of the change. Elias rebuilt not just fences, but bonds, with his children, who saw in him a hero forged in vulnerability, with Clara, whose love deepened in the fires of trial, and with the community, now woven into a tapestry of mutual support. The devil's stare became a distant memory, replaced by the warm gazes of those he had touched, a testament to the transformative power of kindness amid the Wild West's brutality. Elias Thorne lived out his days as a beacon, his story whispered around campfires, inspiring wanderers to choose light over shadow. Before we wrap up this tale, I'd love to hear from you. Comment below with the line, "Kindness conquers the devil's stare," if this story reminded you of the strength in second chances. And if this emotional journey through the Wild West has touched your heart, stirred tears in your eyes, or left you feeling inspired by the resilience of the human spirit, then please, from the depths of my storyteller's soul, like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of hope, comment your own stories of redemption, and subscribe to Moments of Love for more heart-touching narratives that remind us we're all capable of rising from the dust.